Now, this is a story every Victorian, every Australian actually needs to hear. At the height of last year's second wave, when more than 5 million Melburnians were locked up in their homes for 112 days straight, the Andrews government secretly ordered Labor strategist John Armitage to embark on a large-scale polling program to monitor public sentiment, all paid for, of course, by you, the Victorian taxpayer. Despite the Premier's insistence that the research wasn't political, we know Armitage, a Labor insider, remember, he was asking Victorians for their reaction to restrictions and to rate the government's performance out of 10. Knowing what I know about political polling, it sounds very much like that's what it is. For more on this, I want to bring in the journalists behind the story who uncovered it all using freedom of information laws, the Australian newspapers, Victorian editor Damon Johnston. Well, Damon, this is extraordinary. Just how elaborate was this polling operation?
Under the FOI Act, I've learned that there were 18,000 pages of raw survey data produced by John Armitage for the Premier's department in one calendar year. Now, not all of that was COVID related, but I believe a lot of it was, and that's a lot of pages. Now, the government has successfully claimed that they're cabinet in confidence and we don't have access to that raw data. But what we do have access to is the questions that were asked through July, right through the second half of last year. And as you say, a lot of them are very political.
So give me a sense, how much taxpayers' money did the Premier or the Labor government hand to John Armitage and his polling firm QDOS?
So, Peter, in the last 5 years, QDOS has been paid more than $2 million. Now, more than $1 million of that was handed to QDOS without even a competitive tender. And tomorrow we're revealing exactly why the government decided to do that.
So that's in the Australian tomorrow. Well, I'm not going to miss that. You know, it's funny, if this research wasn't political, as the Premier's trying to tell us all, then why are they blocking the full release of all of this stuff? I know you've got a lot out of FOI, but a lot's been redacted. If it's not political and we're paying for it as taxpayers, why can't we see it?
Look, I have to agree with you. The government's commitment to freedom of information is just a joke here. It's really freedom from information, and hundreds of pages that were released to me, many of them were redacted. So it's not just the raw survey data, it's also the analysis from John Armitage that went straight to the Premier's private office. The Premier's private office was involved in the framing of the questions, the selection of the geography, the demography of those surveyed, and the timing. So I think that while some of the questions were public health focused about sentiment around testing, washing hands, social distancing, many of them were in fact designed to assess the political fallout from the lockdown. Victorians were asked to score the government performance during the pandemic, 0 to 10, 10 being good, 0 being bad, on leadership as well. And they were also asked to describe the lockdown restrictions as being either much too soft, just right, and too harsh and much too harsh. So I think they sound like pretty political questions, and Victorians paid for that data, and I believe they should see it.
Look, I'm amazed at what happens in Victoria with taxpayers' money that would never be allowed in Canberra. If this sort of polling was conducted, it's polled by political parties. And I'll defend Labor in this regard as much as I'll defend Liberals. It's all paid for by party funds. In Victoria, it's a very different game. How long has this sort of use of taxpayers' money in what is a political realm been going on? I mean, I think that I've observed Daniel Andrews. You know him far better than me. I think he's an incredibly effective, brutally effective political operator. But this is pretty extraordinary.
So Mr Andrews and John Armitage first came into each other's orbits in the early 2000s. Mr Andrews was then the Assistant State Secretary of the Victorian Labor Party, and I believe that Mr Armitage was employed by the party at that point to do focus groups and community surveys. After Mr Andrews won the 2014 election, Mr Armitage then moved to the public payroll and got his first contract in 2016. That was for around $1 million. And then the second contract was awarded, well, was handed to him without any competitive tender in 2019. So he's been conducting this expansive community surveys, political intelligence gathering, if you like, for the better part of 5 years.
Look, just before we go, Damon, do we know if he is still engaged? I mean, they've had 2 more lockdowns this year. Is he still polling on taxpayer money for Daniel Andrews?
His current contract doesn't expire until October 2022, just a few days before the government goes into caretaker mode before the next state election. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that the Premier's private office will be commissioning extensive monitoring of Victorians' views as we speak.
Well, I'll tell you what, I won't be missing the Australian newspaper tomorrow. Damon Johnston, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.